Um, yeah, so I want to tell you about my research and how its perspective might help you in a workshop today or maybe tomorrow. There are some awesome examples of projects stepping forward to create new, transparent ways of doing government that surround us sitting at our tables. In this context in Stanford and Silicon Valley, I'm a bit ashamed to say that my research actually takes a step back and it asks, what is it that we are doing? How are we doing that? And then, what do we need to be aware of to make that work? So, what is it that we're doing? I define the process of government created by transparency as setting expectations for the conduct of conduct. Why do I define it like that? My research looks at how transparency changes democratic processes. A key finding is that, just as we heard, a key finding is that whenever there are movements away from secrecy towards transparency, these are tied to specific expectations about how we should go about things when deciding on questions of government. Now, what's important is that sometimes these expectations are diverse and adversarial. The two most general examples of that is transparency reduces asymmetries of information. This allows markets to create efficient outcomes or consumer citizens to make better choices. Alternative to that, transparency opens discussion and creates more inclusive debates. We've heard this as OpenX from Tanya. We've heard that the government as a platform. Chris asking whether the process is important or the result is important. Those two expectations don't actually align. You'll see on the slide there's actually more out there. If you read what some of the things that Mika Sifry's written about transparency, we see it as this collaborative process that's based on expectations of reciprocity rather than some kind of hierarchy. And there's these other guys, these way out there, autonomous Marxists that actually use transparency in a completely different way. They create productive commons that are adversarial to capitalist production processes. This is called venture communism. A guy named Kleiner in 2008 came up with that term. I liked it. But think about it this way. I mean, think about a 3D printing collective that you're only allowed into the collective if you make your IP transparent, if you can share it. As soon as you have a piece of secret IP, a design that you're not going to share with that collective, you can't use their resources. You're kicked out. That's the license. That's the it's one step further than Creative Commons, but that's the license these guys make. I think it's fascinating. It's what my research is about. So why am I telling you this? The point is that with every movement towards transparency, there is also this political shift sideways. We can see this most clearly in radical progressions of transparency practice within democracy. Now, I've looked at this historically, and the first example I just want to bring up is Hansard records of Parliament. In Commonwealth countries, Hansard is just the record of what is said in Parliament by all MPs. This is actually a fascinating story, if you're a historian maybe. In 1761, there was new printing technologies and new IP markets that were coming around England. And it was actually illegal to report on what was said in Parliament. This story actually has all these crazy parallels to what happened to WikiLeaks in terms of there was a printer who didn't redact names from all these pamphlets he started printing and distributing, and it was a new way to distribute it. It had a very different ending, however, because it was actually whoops, this one. This guy, that's Brass Crosby, the mayor of London, who went to jail on behalf of the printer for 6 weeks. London went up in flames, there was riots, etc., and he came out, and from that day forward, there was actually a liberal market for the printing of these records. This is something totally new. The next one, oops, I'm hitting the wrong computer here, sorry. The next one was this guy, Woodrow Wilson. If you think about open diplomacy, the fact that we know what our treaties say when we have an international agreement. This was a brand new idea around 1918. The quote on the side there is actually from the Guardian newspaper, a different Guardian, but in England nonetheless. And what that quote's actually getting at is the actions of these guys. In 1918, tons and tons of secret treaties were actually leaked by those fellows through, again, a new media, the Telegraph, that went internationally and created this kind of public fervor about what was going on with foreign policy. This changed the idea of what democracy was. How do you represent me in foreign policy? Can we have a discussion about that? There was debate. My own research looked at WikiLeaks for a bit. I won't get into that just for time's sake, but I wanted to show you this because in the context, method, and effect that you see there, these differences, that's my methodology for actually talking about media. In some of the transparency research I've come across, we talk about media as just a vehicle for information. I think we've heard already that it's not. There's certain contexts, there's certain methods, the actual technologies that we use and effects you're hoping for that come together and create a type of transparency as a process of government. And I think that is important when you think about what you're doing and why you're doing it. 1 minute left. So why am I telling this and how are we going to bring it all together? I've shown you these historical examples because I'm interested in instances of radical transparency that become institutionalized and now serve as democratic norms. And we've seen just a couple examples of how that's happened or hasn't happened in the case of WikiLeaks. To understand how that happens, we need to be aware of what we've covered above, and that helps us create a definition of radical transparency on 3 dimensions. So the first dimension that I come up with is mechanism. These are actually the technologies and capture of disclosure. Is it new media that we're using? For Hansard it was. They had new cheap printing presses. For Lennon and Wilson, they had the telegraph wire, which is something new. That's mechanism. The second dimension is position. Is the project outside the target organization? This is another way of saying, is it involuntary or not? With the Hansard example, it wasn't. It wasn't voluntary, and it became voluntary eventually, which is interesting. The third and final dimension to radical transparency is what I just say is political assumptions. We've seen how there are different expectations that go along with transparency, and if your assumption about what democracy is uproots the previous regime's assumption, you're going to be having an adversarial conversation as you try to bring your project to ground. So I'll leave this slide, which is horribly complex for you to see, but it basically just maps out different types of transparency, if you want to think about that way, different expectations that one can have within a democracy, and it allows you to ask, what kind of mechanism am I actually creating? How are my users going to use this? What are my stakeholders going to think about this if we get it running? I can't be this close to Cupertino without saying that there's one more thing. So I will just, if I don't have one more thing. It's the wrong presentation. That's fine. So there we go. Before I get cut off, yeah, there's the project I'm involved with. There's one called the Citizens Agenda that's happening in Australia for the upcoming national election. It's going to be quite interesting. I don't have any more information, but you can look it up quite soon. And the other one, which is kind of a side project that is a little bit of fun that someone might be interested in getting involved with, is just a website called decideonassange.com. And it's not affiliated with WikiLeaks or the WikiLeaks party that now exists, but we're just trying to bring some transparency to a certain Australian citizen who is going to be running for the Senate of Australia shortly, actually. So if there's any coders out there, they want to have a chat, we can do that. But thank you very much.